Elizabeth Hobson is a pinch hitter today. V. Darby Moore, who was supposed to be presenting, is unable to present today, but we're very lucky in that Dr. Hobson is actually the leader of this research lab and extremely qualified to speak on this topic about using tablet apps to collect social behavior data and many other things. So it's a great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. Elizabeth Hobson.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Don. I'm excited to be here. On short notice, this is a surprise, but I'm glad that we had somebody to fill in for Darby. So what I'm going to be talking about today is how what we've been doing in my lab to collect social data. So two caveats here. You might notice that these are all monk parakeets on my title slide. That's the main species that we focus on for social research in the lab. That is not a species you want to release, right? They're super common in the wild and they're invasive, right? You do not want to be tossing these guys out in release, but especially what the project that Darby's starting is we're trying to use a common species to do a lot of manipulative experiments on first, and then try to make some inferences about how other parrot species might respond in similar ways. You might also notice that a bunch of these parakeets have really funny colors on them. So this is one way that in my lab, in the captive studies that we do, we can identify individuals. So each individual has a unique mark. Again, you would not want to do this in a wild population because they would be subject to higher predation pressure and things like that. So this is unique to a captive situation. All right, so the goals of today are to talk you through the kind of social data that we collect, and especially the ways that we've been using tablet apps to reduce some of the friction of getting this kind of data and getting it into analysis faster. So many things that parrots do in the wild are really important for survival and reproduction, and a lot of those happen within a social context. So things like flocking, foraging, roosting, other kinds of grouping, communicating, vocal learning, raising chicks are all fundamentally social processes. And so understanding how individuals are building relationships with other individuals and where those individuals sit within their social groups can be really fundamental to understanding a lot of these basic natural history facts about parrots. And a neat thing about social behavior is that we can quantify and analyze it at different scales of analysis. So for example, on the left here, you can see relationships between specific individuals. So the arrows here, the width of the arrows show how many times an individual has interacted with the other individual. So if this is allopreening here, that first guy is allopreening the second guy 22 times in the top panel. But the second one is only allopreening the first one 3 times in that middle panel. So you can look at how balanced relationships are between individuals, how much reciprocity they have, and how strong those relationships are. On the flip side, you can look at connectivity of individuals within entire social groups. So here you can see the social network depicted of this group of monk parakeets. And so here again, those arrows are showing how many times those individuals are interacting with other individuals in the group. And this could be affiliative behaviors, this could be aggressive behaviors. It really depends on the study question. But you can think of these 2 different scales of analysis. Now, another important thing to keep in mind about social behavior is that we can quantify and analyze it in addition to those different scales, also over time. So we know that fundamentally we expect social relationships and social structure to be changing over time and to be dynamic. So we can get change to group membership through demographic processes as individuals depart or join groups. But you can also get changes in relationships between specific individuals as those relationships strengthen or weaken between particular individuals. And I think it's really exciting to think about how analyzing sociality at different scales can be used for a variety of questions that have a variety of management implications. So at the relationship level, if you're choosing which birds or which pairs to release in a release program, you might want to know which relationships are balanced, which pairs are strengthening versus weakening their relationships. And that might impact your decision on which birds go into your release program. Same thing at the group level. If you want to say, okay, we're going to release a bunch of individuals together, which subsets of individuals have higher group cohesion and might stick together in the wild once they are released. Same thing with aggression. What are the ranks of the individuals? Do you have a high ranking individual? Is that individual more likely to socially integrate with a wild flock if it's released? Or is a low ranking individual more likely to integrate? So by looking at the social structure, you can better choose which birds go into a release program, but you can also monitor the success of the releases in the individuals once they're out there in the wild and trying to integrate into wild social groups. All right, so there's a couple common methods for collecting social data. So usually what we do is go out, we observe identified individuals. Usually this is somebody out there with binoculars and watching how individuals that you can recognize who's who through marks like the color marks that we do on our monk parakeets, or maybe neck tags on some birds, or patagial tags. So you observe who's interacting with who, what they're doing with each other, and record the data either in something like a notebook, or you can annotate and do a voice recording. And then the major third step is you have to digitize that data. And a major friction point here is when you're recording and digitizing the data, and when those are separate steps, it's extremely easy to get behind on data entry. So who's behind on data entry right now? Yeah, it's a very common problem. And if you can't get the data into digital format, you can't start to do the analyses that you need to do to quantify relationships and understand social structures. And so minimizing the friction there and getting from observing the data and recording it into digital format faster is a really big benefit. And that's one thing, I think that's the critical thing that I really like about using these behavior apps to record the data, is we can enter the data directly into electronic format using a tablet. So here you can see my postdoc, Anna Marie, is observing a captive group of these monk parakeets. And the lower picture shows a screenshot of the tablets and what we see on the front of the tablets. Now, there are a lot of behavioral apps out there. So we did go through, and Anna Marie led this paper where we looked at the pros and cons and the different features of several different behavioral apps. Most of these are either free or very low cost. So there is a cost involved, and you have to buy the iPad or a tablet. But a lot of these apps are extraordinarily low cost. And as I'm going to show you, once you know how to get them started, they're very, very easy to use. So don't be intimidated by them at all. So we like the Animal Observer app the best for the kind of data collection that we do for the social behaviors. And so there are just 3 steps to entering data with this kind of app. So you can see in the screenshot here with the circles and the different colors and the letters, each of those circles indicates a specific individual bird. And what you do is you watch what's happening. And if a bird, let's say all black, BBB there, does something to somebody else, you click on all black and you just drag it to whoever was targeted by all black's behavior. So let's say that's black, red, red, BRR there. You draw that arrow towards the target bird, and then a menu screen pops up, and you just choose your behavior from the pop-up menu. So all the data are automatically date and time stamped in this method. It's very quick to enter the data and to keep up with all the social drama that's happening. And all the data are saved as a text file, which you can export and then open in Excel, R, or whatever you like to use for analyses. As I'll mention later, Darby has been doing a ton of work on developing video tutorials, especially about Animal Observer, so that it's easier for everybody to get started. So definitely email Darby if you would like access to the tutorials. She's got them in English and Spanish now, and she's working on Portuguese. So it's really exciting to get those methods out there to more people. Now, the type of social interaction data that you collect in these apps will obviously depend on your species and the study questions, but these are three of the behaviors that we collect on the monk parakeets in the captive groups. So we record who's nearest neighbors to who. We record any affiliative behavior. This might be allopreening or copulations. And we record several different kinds of aggression, like displacements or chases. And then we use all of those behaviors to identify social network structures and the strength of different kinds of relationships. Now, in a more conservation and management context, one thing that we're excited about Darby's project for is that she's taking these methods and using them to look at social competency in parrots. So she's looking at whether early life experiences might compromise an individual's social competency, and also whether individuals can learn and recover to be socially competent as adults, so that we can see if hand raising or parent raising can be a viable option for conservation of some of the more endangered and threatened species. One last thing I wanted to mention is we've got a lot of people in the lab working on making these methods more accessible and customizable. So Darby is training people through tutorials. Chelsea is consulting and building custom data collection apps. And Claire is developing accessible data analysis portals to quantify social relationships and structure. So this is the overview of what I showed you today. I gave you the pitch for why social interactions can be critically important to many aspects of parrot biology and why they're important to quantify. I gave you a little taste of how simple it is to set up some of these data collection apps to get more quickly from observing behaviors into analyzing behaviors. And then I showed you one way that Darby is using these kinds of social data collection to look at social relationships, things like social connectivity, and social competence, which all might impact the success of parrots as they go back into the wild. Thanks, everybody, and I'd be very happy to answer all your questions.
Thanks, Liz. Wow. Thank you very much. What's the lead author's name on the paper? I'm going to see if I can find it and put it out to the group.
Sure. It's Anna Marie van der Marel. And I can find the link and put that in the chat.
Okay, too. That would be perfect.
Yep.
Any questions?
If you're interested in starting to use any of these methods, we're also very excited to talk to people about collaborating. So I know Darby's been reaching out to several partners about getting collaborations started.
Great. Yes, we're working with Darby in Costa Rica at our site. And she already has one of her apps established there, and we're also using ZooMonitor to collect data on these birds. And again, where it's nice also is when you have lots of volunteers and you have a simple computer game looking app system, you have young volunteers who are used to quickly moving things around on a computer on a tablet screen. It's not a big jump for them culturally to play a new game based on what they're seeing in the real world.
It's kind of fun, and it's a good way to make all the data very consistent across different individuals, because there's only one way to enter the data. So it essentially pre-cleans a lot of the data before it gets recorded.
Perfect. So there's something in the chat. How much observation time do you think is needed to get an idea of the social dynamics of a group? I'm thinking of selecting individuals that get along to define a release group for reintroduction. How long might you need to to observe these birds?
Yeah, it really depends. It's a species specific kind of question. So, for example, for looking at monk parakeet dominance hierarchies, they are so feisty. They fight all the time. And so we don't need very much observation to get a good idea of the social hierarchy of groups. But a lot of species don't interact at the same frequency. So if you have a species that is not quite as
Amazon
interactive.
parrots, for example.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. It might take a lot longer to try to get the amount of data that you would need to really understand the social structure. Relationship level dynamics are much easier to measure. A lot of cases, if you're saying who's a pair with who, right? Who's in a pair bond. It's going to be very easy just to eyeball things and be like, yep, those guys are a pair and those guys are a pair. But the good thing about quantifying the data is then you can say, in a less eyeball-y way, you can say, well, here's the strength of the relationship, or here's the balance of the reciprocity of the relationship in a way that might be much harder to just perceive by eye.
Very good. And Gabby has one last question. What did you use to paint the parrots, and how long did it last?
Yeah, so we use the very technical method of drawing all over their faces with Sharpie markers. So Sharpies are non-toxic and permanent. In our case, the gray feathers in the monk parakeets facial feathers absorb the dye really, really well. And so we can see very bright marks for 2 weeks to 4 weeks usually, even in bright sun and normal wild conditions, but we do have to catch them and refresh the marks. So this is really easy in a captive situation. It's much harder in a wild situation. So for long-term observations in a wild population, you definitely want something that's more of a permanent marker that you can see better.
Okay. And Gabby asked, and maybe you can answer in chat, did it interfere with the hierarchy?
Oh
So,
yeah, so this is always fun. Yeah, it's we have no evidence that it impacts anything about behavior or hierarchies or rank in the
great.
parakeets, which is great.
Okay, perfect.